was driving this bus in Florida with my family, and we went to some cabins by the beachside, and I had to park this in a very narrow space, and I had to back it in. One of the workers there at the resort came and offered to give me some directions, and I couldn't get it right because I didn't know how to drive the thing. So he runs up to the driver's side, and he stands there and he says, "Don't you know how to drive this bus?" And I said, "Well, no." And I'm talking to this guy who's in his mid-20s, maybe his late 20s. And I asked him if he knew how to drive it, and he said yes. And he only had about 2 feet on the left side of the bus and another 2 feet on the right side of the bus, with a car on one side and the wall on the other, 18 inches from a wall at the back, no backup camera, and he just backs it in one shot smoothly. "How do you know how to drive this bus so well?" And he said that when he was a kid growing up in Brazil, his father had this bus route and another job, and sometimes he needed a substitute to drive. So he put his 10-year-old kid in the driver's seat and taught him how to drive a 40-foot bus. So from the age of 10 years until he was in his early 20s, he was driving this bus. You can expect a lot more from your kid than what our culture does. In the state I live in today, I can be arrested for leaving my 12-year-old son unattended in the minivan. And he knows how to drive it. I would just point out that at the age of 12, Jesus Christ was able to fend for himself, provide shelter and food and water for himself for several days in the city of Jerusalem. You should expect a lot more from your kid than what our culture does. We surveyed several hundred survivalists and emergency experts and asked them the question, what is the most important thing a kid needs to know by the time he's 12 years old? The number 5 most important thing a kid needs to know by the time he's 12 years old is how to fish and hunt. There's a saying that if you give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day, but if you teach a man to fish, he'll eat for a lifetime. To give him a skill that allows him to keep himself alive is a very valuable thing. I don't personally enjoy hunting very much. I know some people get a real thrill out of it. They enjoy the outdoors, the companionship, the sport. They get a thrill out of waiting for the prey to come by and then they shoot it. That's great. I go hunting, I get cold and bored and I fall asleep and I miss the deer. I've made sure to do it anyway now and then to keep my skills up and to teach my kids. Especially I've got one boy who enjoys it, so I'm glad that I had the opportunity to teach him how to hunt. Kids spend way too much time inside and doing things that are too easy. I think it's very important, especially for boys, but also for girls, to come out here and catch some fish and reel them in and scale them and clean them out and deal with the dirty stuff and the guts and the blood and the scales and the smell. And the same thing when they go hunting. Go up there and cut the throat and let the blood drain out and then field dress it by cleaning the guts out and do all those things that are gross and hard and get you bloody. Get off the couch a little bit and stop doing something that's so easy like playing the video games, and it raises up a whole generation of softies. They're getting an advantage here that's not just about the ability to go and get food. It's also something that has to do with character development, getting some calluses and doing some things that are difficult. The number 4 most important thing a kid needs to know by the time he's 12 years old is first aid, and I'll tell you about that right now. You're not going to get certified in first aid by watching me here today. Either the Red Cross or the YMCA or your state emergency management agency can hook you up with a course in first aid. Take your kid. I got my certification when I was 11 years old, and your kid can do the same thing. It's just enough of a challenge to be good for your kid, and he could save a life someday. Basic first aid just has to do with having a fundamental understanding of how the body works and what it needs in order to be safe and function properly in different environmental conditions. He'll learn things like how to deal with heat stroke, minor wounds and burns and breaks. He'll learn how to do a splint, how to stop bleeding, depending on the severity, even how to do CPR. Administering first aid is a very important skill, especially if your kid has younger siblings that he watches, that he's responsible for occasionally. These are things that boys and girls need to know by the time they're 12 years old. The number 3 most important thing a kid needs to know by the time he's 12 years old is how to swim. And I'll show you that right now. Now it's a hot day today, but just last night it was in the 40s, and the night before it was in the low 30s. So if your kid falls in that 15 to 20 foot deep water with steep banks and doesn't know how to swim, he could die. He would either pass out from hypothermia or just sink to the bottom. Either way, he's in very serious danger if he doesn't know how to swim. He's got to know how to swim. So I'm not going to teach you how to swim today, but you need to find somewhere your kid can get some lessons. A child can learn how to swim before they can learn how to walk. There's several programs out there that'll do that, and you need to find one. If your kid falls in the water, even your own swimming pool, at the age of 1 or 6 months, he can save his life if you've taught him how to swim. Find one of those programs. Teach your kid how to swim and save his life. Because of the kids who die from accidental causes between the ages of 1 and 14 years, 1/4 of those die in your own swimming pool. According to our survivalist and emergency experts, the number 2 most important thing a kid needs to know by the time he's 12 years old is how to get home. And I'll tell you about that right now. It applies whether you're out in the wilderness or in the middle of a busy metropolis. Either way, you could find yourself lost for whatever reason and need to get home. So if you're 12 years old and you don't know your address or your phone number, you have no idea where you are, how you got there, or how to get home, you're in serious trouble. Any kid ought to be able to find shelter and food and water and know how to get home. Figuring out how to get home entails a number of things. You need to know your address. You need to know your phone number. You need to know where you are. You need to know whom you can trust. One time my family and I were at Disney in Orlando. My 5-year-old got lost. I looked around and he wasn't with me. Well, fortunately, one thing we had done was to give him a tag to hang around his neck. And this tag had his name and my cell phone number, so that if he got lost, he could show it to somebody and have them call my cell phone. Right about the time that I was trying to figure out where he was, I got a phone call. It was a stranger asking me if I had lost my son. He was 5 at the time. But by the time he's 12 years old, your child ought to know how to get home on his own. By now you've seen 4 of the top 5 things a kid needs to know by the time he's 12 years old. Number 5 was how to fish and hunt. Number 4 was first aid. Number 3 was how to swim. Number 2 was how to get home. And up next, the number 1 thing a kid needs to know by the time he's 12 years old. Gun safety. Now, I know a lot of you are freaked out because you don't want your kids handling guns before the age of 12. Just like we have to teach kids about trucks in the road, or the dangers of water, or about electricity, so also we need to teach kids about gun safety, even if all we're telling them is never touch a gun. By the time a kid is 1 or 2, he ought to know never to touch a gun. By the time he's 5 or 6, he ought to know how to handle a gun and shoot it. So I'm going to tell you the 3 main rules of gun handling safety. But before that, I want to talk about your mindset. Handling a gun is a lethal operation. It's not the same thing, for example, as handling a computer or a sharp tool. Generally, if you make a mistake with a knife, you might cut yourself and have to put on a Band-Aid. If you make a mistake with the computer, you might lose a hard drive, you could lose all of your photos, but nothing lethal is going to happen. That's not the case at all with handling a gun. If you make a mistake handling a gun, you could kill yourself or someone else. Even if you don't want your kids ever to touch a gun, you've got to teach them gun safety. You need to be able to keep your kids safe in the event there's a gun in the house that you live in, or if you go visit somebody who has a gun. The first rule you teach a kid is not to touch it. By the time my kids were 1 or 2 years old, they knew never to touch a gun, and if they were confused about whether it was a real gun or a toy gun, they were not allowed to touch it at all. The number one rule of gun handling is to always keep it pointed in a safe direction, so that if it does go off accidentally, unintentionally, nobody gets hurt. Number 2 rule of gun safety is never to touch the trigger until you're ready to shoot. The number 3 rule of gun handling safety is never to load it until you're ready to shoot it. This is a semi-automatic weapon, and it has a magazine with ammunition in it. When I put this in, the chamber is still not loaded. There's not a bullet in the chamber, so that if I pull the trigger, nothing's going to happen. In order to load one into the chamber, I have to have a loaded magazine in the gun and then pull the slide. And in that case, it will fire when I pull the trigger. Number 1, always keep it pointed in a safe direction. Number 2, don't touch the trigger until you're actually ready to shoot. That means that you've got your target on sight and you've decided that you're going to shoot it. And then you touch the trigger. Don't touch it before then. Number 3, never have a round in the chamber until you're ready to use it. Well, thanks for watching. And now that you've seen what our experts had to say about the 5 most important things a kid needs to know by the age of 12, you'll be interested to know that there were a lot of other responses. During the next few weeks, we'll have some more videos looking at some of the runners-up. Be sure and come back and watch our videos on YouTube, and go to the website, survivalnewsonline.com, the best place on the web for emergency preparedness information. We'll see you there.